I was I was born in Texline, Texas, which is on the border of Oklahoma. 1925, 11 month, 15th day, 1925. I don't really remember the home that I was born into, but the folks moved on to a farm when I was small, and it was made out of old wood siding that turned gray with no paint on it. It turned gray with the weather. We had a kerosene lamp and no plumbing, outdoor plumbing. My earliest childhood memory was going to my aunt's in Delhart, Texas. My Aunt Alice in Delhart, Texas. Kids didn't do much. When you were small, you kind of sit back and let the adults do all the talking. I had a doll, a little rubber doll, that I really liked. When I was young, we had this house, and Mom and Dad had chickens. And I had this playhouse along the side of the chicken house I had built up. And I made the best mud pies in the county because I was cracking Mom's eggs and putting in my mud pies. And the folks got to missing the eggs. And Mom said, "I wonder what's the matter with those chickens, they're not laying." And I knew, but I didn't say anything. And finally, they caught me at making mud pies with the eggs. That was the last of that. We played games in the old granary, and we used to play hide and seek, all of us kids. And whenever we had cousins over, they'd come over, and the mice were bad. And the mice ran up one of my cousin's pants leg, and that was the end of the hide and seek. We had chores. We lived along the railroad, and in Texas there were no wood. And we would go out and pick up cow chips to burn in the cook stove. We'd take the wagon and pick it up, and the guys in the railroad seen us, and they got to throwing coal off for us, and we'd pick up the coal and bring home. We were poor as church mice. It was depression most all the time for us, just getting food to eat, because there were 6 of us at home, and then there was more come afterwards. And so we just made our own fun in the Colorado. In the winter times, we'd go skiing. We'd go skating on the river because it froze over. And Dad cut ice for the summer out of the river. And we had lots of time, and most of the time we had cows, and we had these cows back in our pasture. Dad had homesteaded 360 acres, and so he let the cows back there to graze, and every night Dan and I would have to go after these cows to bring them in to milk. And they had sighted bears at the end of our place, and so Dan and I would just play around. we pulled wild celery and eat wild celery and just fiddled around until it got dark. And here we was trying to find cows in the dark. And Dad had put bells on them. Well, the cows, when it got dark, they laid down to go to sleep, bed down. And we were looking all over for them. And we come over this little hump in the field there, and we seen these black things laying on the ground. We thought it was a bear. We were scared to death. And so this old cow, she had seen us, and she shook her head, and the bell rang. And that's the only thing that saved us, 'cause we were scared that we were running into a bear. The only time I had money to spend was when I had a tooth, and Dad always pulled my teeth. But I wouldn't let him pull my tooth because it hurt so bad. So they took me to the dentist, and the dentist said, well, I didn't want him to pull it either. So he said, I'll give you $1, a silver dollar, if you'll let me pull your tooth. So that was the first money that I ever had. We went to the merchandise store, and I bought me a new dress, and we bought candy and apples. We never had apples or fruit. So I bought a new dress with that $1, apples and candy. I had fun in school. So the school that we lived in Colorado, that's the one that I remember most, because I was 5 when we left Texas. And it was a one-room schoolhouse, and we rode horses to school. And we had a barn in the back of the schoolhouse where the horses stayed while we was in school all day. And then we'd ride the horses home. And we had an old bell that rung by hand to call us in for recess. I like to read. Well, the first we had in the school, we had plays at Christmas time. And Mom she had one of those old curling irons that you put down into a lamp at the heat, and she fixed my hair with that curling iron. But other times my hair was just straight. I was more tomboy than I was girl. Yes, I had a real dear girlfriend named Lois. Lois was an only child, and we did a lot of things together. In fact, I would go home with her without telling Mom to stay all night. And we had no telephones, so the boys would tell Mom where I was. And I got into a lot of trouble over that. We didn't know anything about the movie stars in those days because we had no television. We had one old radio. It was battery run, and Dad wouldn't let us use it. He kept it for news. We had dogs. We had dogs, and we had a pet duck. We had a pet pig, and we had an old turkey that had stole her nest out and brought home a whole flock of little baby turkeys. No, there was no church in the town of where we lived, but later I went to church in Albuquerque. Oh, we had fun holidays. My friend Lois's folks would come over to our house, or we'd go to their house. And we had big dinners, and at that time of the year it was snow so bad the cars couldn't, there was no cars hardly anyway, but we had a horse and sleigh, and we go with a horse and sleigh to each other's houses. We never celebrated birthdays, really. In fact, we didn't have sugar usually to make cakes. Mom didn't have sugar to make cakes, so we didn't have really birthday cakes at all. The evening meal we called supper. Well, we had lots of cornbread and lots of beans and fried potatoes. And Mom baked bread. She made the best bread. And she would make kuchen, which is a bread rolled flat and sour cream put on it and sugar and cinnamon. And when I cooked it, made kind of a little sauce on the top of it. It was real good. Every year Dad would, when we cleaned up the yard and around the river, we had a big hole. Dad would pile all the brush in that hole, and we'd light that the 4th of July and have firecrackers. As a teenagers, things were really rough. We had little kids coming. Mom had babies coming, and I had to help Mom wash, scrub diapers and clothes. And we had this old house Dad had built out of green lumber. And whenever the lumber dried, there were cracks in the floor. So we used lice water to scrub the floor with. And Mom would heat up, she made her own soap, and it was made with lye. And we would take the broom and scrub the floor, and then the water would run right down the crack in the cracks, down on the ground.
Right.
No, the only entertainment we had was when our neighbors come over and we had taffy pulls. Mom made taffy, and we kids would pull the taffy. And then we had the Christmas programs that we had at school, and that was about all the entertainment that we had. When I was young, I was in a jitterbug contest and won first prize. I was about 15, and the town had a jitterbug contest, and my partner won first prize. It wasn't much of a prize. In the Second World War, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we kids didn't really realize how bad it was, but we had lots of friends that were going off to war, and my dad worked for Ernie Powell, the news correspondent at that time. He was real famous, and Dad went and worked on his yard. That was about the only famous person I knew had never met. When I left home, I got married at 16. I left home then. I went down to Wichita Falls, Texas. That's where Lee was stationed.
Okay.
And then I got pregnant right away, and I come back home to visit the folks in Colorado, and stayed in fact, I worked for the neighbors up there, helped cooking for the hard hands. I made $20 a month. I worked on this ranch before I ever got married, and stayed with the people, and their name was Crowley. And I worked on their ranch and helped cook for hard hands. And I stayed there, and I had to cook breakfast. Breakfast for cowboys was frying steak and biscuits and gravy. So it was a big deal. We cooked 6 chickens one day, fried 6 chickens for hay hands. And then they milked cows, and I separated the cow, run the old separator with taking the cream away from the milk. And I churned butter and molded the butter in molds and ironed, washed with an old wash machine that went put, 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 put. And ironed with flat irons that you heated on the stove. It varied. When they were putting up hay, it was usually about 12 guys. And other times when they weren't haying, it was just about 6. I had my baby in Wichita Falls, Texas, in the Army hospital by myself. And in fact, when I got out of the hospital, I had no place to go, because my husband was in the brig, and I had no place to go. And when I had first went up down to Wichita Falls, I had a hotel room, and there was an old black man that was a janitor at the hotel, and he told me to call. He was the one, I started having pains, and he was the one that told me to call the Army. And then when I got out, they took me back to the hotel, and you couldn't have a baby there at the hotel. So the old black man, he went and found a place for me to stay, him and his wife. And they made the babies bands to go around their stomach, and diapers. And that's about all the clothes that I had for the babies what they had made for it. And I stayed there till they finally released Lee. He got out of the service. Then we went up to Albuquerque. And from there on, I worked at different ranches, cooking and cleaning house around Albuquerque. He was a little guy, but I had him right with me. From there on, when I went to these ranches and worked, the lady at the ranch wanted me to stay there with them. And I said no, I had a home. So I went back to where they had a little shack on the back of the ranch that we lived in. And Lee was never much to work. And I made most of the living with, working and cleaning house and cooking for the hard hands. And then we decided that the guys fired Lee because he didn't work. So I was out of a job too. So Mom and Dad had moved to Washington. So we come out to Washington in a car. We comes through Salt Lake and come out to Washington in a car. And then I stayed out here. And we had lots of jobs here. And I worked in Granger at the bug house. which is making fish lures. And I took help Mom because she was working, and I took over the house, taking care of Dad and cleaning and doing the cooking. Lee was mad because he didn't want me to do this, and there was no place for us to stay, so we had to stay at Mom and Dad's. And then he took off, and I never knew where he was at for, probably 6 months. And then he come back, and he asked Mom if he could take Warren for a little ride. So he took Warren and left. And I didn't see Warren until Warren was grown then, after that. But by that time I was working in a restaurant there in Granger, the Circle Inn. And I stayed there and worked at the bug house too, and stayed with the folks. I was 18 years old, and the folks were good enough to let me stay there at their place. And then when Dan, my brother, decided that him and I would get a little house to live in together. And so we lived in this little house. Well, I'm probably getting ahead of myself because I had married Dennis's dad. And I was pregnant with Dennis's dad, and he left, and I never seen him again. And so I had 2 little guys to take care of and work to try to keep clothes on all of us. And then, I think Dennis was about 2 and a half, I met Bill Bishop. My friends Lorraine and Vernie Rice introduced me to Bill. And then, from then on, Bill, he helped with Dennis. He was good with Dennis. And then we got married in June the 5th, 1948. I was 22 by that time. We didn't do much because Bill had just got out of the service. We didn't have no money between us, hardly, but just what we needed to eat and live on. So we didn't go to no shows. We didn't go to, we did go to, Lorraine and Bernie took us to the Granger dance over by Toplish. We went there, and just the dances and going to Mom and Dad's, and his uncle and aunt lived there in Granger. We went to their place, and he went to his folks' place, and that was
Carl and Esther.
Yeah, and we had some friends that lived in Yakima. We went to Carl and Esther Ortman, and that's about all the entertainment we did. Well, Dad was reluctant to get married because neither one of us had any money. And I told him, I said, where there's a will, there's a way. So we decided to get married. And we got married, and his Aunt Jim told him that he wasn't going to make it. And Dad was determined that he was going to make it. When we got married, we made it. We made good. Every year we just kept getting better and better. It was hard because we didn't have no furniture, And Dad had bought furniture, had bought an old washing machine and a desk and an old treadle sewing machine. I sewed on the treadle sewing machine. And Dad had bought a cow. We had a cow, so we had milk. And we bought chickens. We had chickens and we had eggs. And the chickens had little baby chicks, so we killed them for our meat, put in the freezer. And that's about it until we moved to Moses Lake. I had just Dennis then, because Warren had took Warren, and I didn't know where they was, and I didn't have enough money to try to track him down, and so we just kind of left it at that. We was thinking Roseanne, my niece, had met Warren down in Albuquerque, so we knew where he was at, but we just left him there because he, it was just too much of a struggle trying to keep one baby alive and go on. And then Bill and I got married, and we had Dennis. Larry was born May the 31st, the next year, 1949. And we had Dennis and Larry then. And we lived on a hop yard. We was working for a man that had the hop yard. And the boys loved to go out in the hop yard with Bill. And Dennis went out one night when Dad went to milk the cow, and we couldn't find him. And the neighbor found him for us and brought him home. And then after we lived in the hop yard, we bought a house in Granger, a little house. And what a fake house that was. It was for the kitchen floor, it was old doors off of train cars laid on the ground. And the mice were so bad, I had to put my cereal clear up in the top of box we had for cabinets. We had apple boxes. So I put my cereal clear up there, and finally they got into the cereal. And I told Dad, I said, I don't want to live here anymore until we do something to this place. So Dad took a job out in the asparagus farm, and we lived in this asparagus farm 2 summers. We worked there. And then Colleen was born, and we had worked on this little house in Granger and got it halfway decent to live in. And then Dad got a job over in Topnish at the machinery shop over there, International Machinery Shop. And then he got laid off. And so he had a friend that worked in the Safeway down in Sunnyside, had a friend that he'd went to school with. So he hired him to work in the Safeway store, which Dad hated. He hated because of the produce. He was working in the produce department, and the ladies would come and lift up the lettuce, he'd put all in line, and he hated that. I think it was about a year after that, he got laid off, and he got this job in Moses Lake at the International Harvester. So we moved. Brenda was about 6 months old when we moved to Moses Lake. It was 1954 when we moved to Moses Lake, and Brenda was just 6 months old. And when we moved to Moses Lake, Dad had gotten kind of in with the man that had built all the houses there in the Basin Homes, Mr. Buell. And he had told Dad that if he helped him do some work, that he would let us have a house for the down payment. So that's how we got the house there. And it was a brand new house. I can't remember how many years we lived there until we decided what happened is I wouldn't let my kids run the neighborhood. So all the neighborhood kids were in our yard all the time because they wanted to play with our kids. So Dad was gone most of the time working in Montana and Idaho. So I said, well, let's buy us a place out in the country. Well, we went out on McConaughey Flats and we bought 4 acres. Then we built a basement home on the 4 acres. They drilled a well, and we lived in that basement for about 10 years before we built the house on top. My last boy, Randy, was born in Moses Lake. He was the tail end of the 6 kids I had, and he was a little comic guy. He was always having fun and telling jokes, and he was a comic of the family. Dennis had a job of delivering papers, and so he stole one of his dad's packs of cigarettes and smoked them and got so sick that he couldn't deliver papers. So when his dad got up that morning, he had to take him on his route to deliver the papers. When we had just Dennis and Larry, we lived up in the Weenas, which we lived on a ranch, and we had 2 horses. And the neighbors down the road wanted us to join their club that square danced on horses.
Weenam.
The club was Weenas Weenams. So we joined the club, and we performed at all the little towns every year. We'd go, and Dad was a flagman. Bill was a flagman, and we went to all the parades, went down the streets in the parades, and
we did.
Then the fair, Yakima Fairground, wanted us to perform there.
We put it on twice, once in the afternoon and once at night. In
the evening, we were asked to do 2, and we went and took all of our horses up there, and we had 16 horses, because it was 2 squares, and each, man and wife had a horse, so that made 16 horses. And I had this horse that I had never rode before, because the one that I had rode was lame, and I was kind of scared, because I was afraid I was going to fall off, because when you thread the needle, you got to keep going, because the next guy will run into you. So we threaded the needle, and then we square danced on horses, and everybody just loved it. And that was the most exciting time when we performed for the fair. But we did it at other places too. We had square dance at all the other places. And
they charged us to get on. They charged us to get into the fair.
You didn't get in free because you
No.
were part of the entertainment? My gosh. That was terrible.
We put on a show in the front of the grandstand, and they charged us to get in.
That's pretty bad.
when Bill and I was married, we had an old wood stove to cook with. And I liked the old wood stove. I used to make cottage cheese. I'd put the milk on the back of the stove where it just kept warm, and it made cottage cheese. Well, when we moved to Moses Lake, I got an electric stove. The first electric stove I ever had, and I burnt everything. Everything I had burnt until I learned to cook on it. And then we had a washing machine that was automatic. I put too much soap in the washing machine and it ran over because it was down in the basement, and the floor was all covered with water before we could get it turned off. And I think my most prized thing that I ever did, and I was proud of myself, because I had quit school in the 10th grade. I had never graduated. And so when I got my family raised, I went back to college and got my GED and took 3 or 4 courses through the winter, and I come out okay with that. And that was about 50 years after I had quit school, and it was hard, but I did it. The first time I drove a car was after I married Bill, and we had this old Dodge. We had bought a new Dodge. We had bought a new Dodge pickup. We had a little Ford pickup, and that thing, you couldn't start it half the time. Dad had to crank it. And this Dodge pickup, I got in it, and Dad, when we lived on the ranch up in the Weenass, I would take it, and Dad would let me drive it while he threw hay off to the cattle, and that's how I learned how to drive the pickup. And that was exciting, and I drove the pickup, and then we had other cars. And the first time we had a TV, I had seen a TV, was when we got married, and when we lived in Moses Lake, we bought a black and white TV, and I had never seen one before. The first airplane ride was kind of a fluke. Bill told me that I'd get sick because I got car sick. So here I was. We went down to Larry and Kathy's wedding to California, San Diego, and here I was thinking I was going to throw up any time because he told me I'd get sick. Well, I didn't get sick. So I was pretty proud about that. And that was the first plane ride. I've only been on a plane twice. The second time was when we went down to visit Larry and Kathy. And that was kind of that time was when we went to Larry and Kathy's wedding. I had to drive from Moses Lake to Spokane by myself because Dad was over in Montana, and Dad caught a little plane out of, I think it was, where was Dad? He was up in the northern part of Montana, and we met there at Spokane. Then when we come home, I had to drive home in the dark because we come home late in the evening, and here I was by myself driving home. But we had a good car, so I drove home and made it fine.
Belonged to an
Yeah,
all
I
that
belonged to
fairs.
garden clubs and worked at the Grant County Fair for 25 years, and worked in the bacon department and in the flower department. I belonged to a lot of to a flower garden club, and I won quite a few ribbons making arrangements, and I won ribbons making angel food cake from scratch at the bakery. And I love to do crafts. I did a lot of crafts in my years.
Worked at that county fair, and they made us pay to get in.
I tell you, you've been ripped off for a lot of years, Dad.
Bill worked over in Montana on the roads. He ran a paver, and I'd put the kids all in the car, and we would go and spend a weekend with him. And this one weekend he worked over in Ellensburg, and so we decided to pull the trailer over there. And we had this old Ford station wagon, and it didn't have no power at all. And we get going with that trailer, and when you go up a hill, it would just slow down to nothing. You wouldn't think you were going to make it. But we pulled it over to Ellensburg and spent the weekend with him over there. And we spent a lot of time in Montana over there on the camping out. And we had a little trailer, but the kids had a tent they stayed in. My favorite flower is the calla lily, and my favorite color is purple. I had a big bouquet of calla lilies when I got married that Dad had bought me. When I was young, I thought my world was ending when I had so much trouble with husbands. And I was down in the dumps. Then I met Bill, and it seemed like everything turned around for me.
Oh, the bitter winds are coming in, and I'm already missing the summer. Stockholm's cold, but I've been told I was born to endure this kind of weather. When it's you, I find like a ghost in my mind. I am defeated, and I gladly wear the crown. I'll be your Emmylou, and I'll be your June, if you'll be my Graham and my Johnny too. No, I'm not asking much of you, just sit bless them with your patience.